Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, okay. I think something's wrong with the stream, though. Okay, uh, uh, okay. God willing, I'll start. So, where is okay? Okay, so let's all seek refuge in God from Satan the rejected. Surah 37, verse 133. Lot. Lot was one of the messengers. We saved him and all his family. Only the old woman was doomed. We annihilated all the others. You still pass by their ruins by day and by night. Would you understand? So this part talks about Lot and his people, and we all know about the story of Lot. Um, Lot practiced homosexuality. I mean, not Lot. I'm sorry. People of Lot practiced homosexuality, and Lot was one of the messengers who was, a follower of Abraham, and he believed with Abraham and became a submitter. And the town that he lived in, was infested by people who practiced homosexuality, and they were the first people in the world who started this practice. So you can imagine the amount of sins, piling up on top of them on their record for all the people that, they have introduced, this abomination to. And his wife was doomed. Lot could not save his wife because his wife actually betrayed him, God says. And I mean, it's hard to understand in what way she betrayed him, but the Quran says his wife betrayed him, and that's why she was doomed. I mean, um, there's more discussion about it in the Bible, but of course, we don't have any way of verifying that from the Quran. But all we know is, and that's all we really need to know, is that he could not save his wife because his wife was not worthy of being saved based on God's decision, because she probably did not side with God for whatever reason, and that ended up in her being annihilated because she was not a believer. Um, so you could definitely, and what we would take from this is, and from this short passage, is that Lot could not save his own wife because she was not the believer and she didn't deserve to be saved. And so just because you are, a spouse of someone who is a believer doesn't necessarily make you a believer, of course. We learned that too. And you could be a believer. And another thing I learned from this is you could be a believer and somehow end up with a disbelieving spouse like that. And then, you know, God will eventually, um, you know, um, separate them, I suppose, because we see in the case of Lot, his wife was doomed. I mean, the separation obviously could happen in this world or it could happen in the hereafter for sure, because, I mean, Lot's not going to be with his spouse in the day of judgment. I mean, after in heaven, right? So, but God also, used this as a lesson to show us that the people of Lot were annihilated because of this thing, because of practicing this abomination. And so, people who are practicing that in today's society are being annihilated also. And God's mechanism is based on not annihilating an entire community, because there would be people among them that don't deserve to be annihilated. There are many straight people, for example, among today's communities, and they're all mixed up. But people, so God has created all these diseases, including AIDS and all these other viruses, to annihilate these people selectively, and we see that happening as we speak. And God has preserved not only that, I mean, God has preserved their ruins specifically for the people of Lot. I mean, if you go to the geographical place where this occurred by the Dead Sea, you know, it is actually has you know, if you search the land, you know, you'll actually find those sulfur rocks um, in the land that were actually you know, showered on these people, you know, which is quite amazing, you know, to think about. You know, all these people who think these are tales, you know, can actually go and verify, you know, uh, and you know, research land. There's videos about it on YouTube as well, and you can actually you know, see those stones there. It's pretty amazing, subhanallah. So God will then continue. Jonah 139. Jonah was one of the messengers. He escaped to the loaded ship. He rebelled, and thus he joined the losers. Consequently, the fish swallowed him, and he was the one to blame. If it were not that he resorted to meditation on God, he would have stayed in his belly until the day of resurrection. We had him thrown up into the desert, exhausted. We had a tree of edible fruit grown for him. Then we sent him to 100,000 or more. They did believe, and we let them enjoy this life. Okay, God willing, I'll pause here. So Jonah was actually one of the messengers as well that, you know, God had sent, and Jonah didn't realize that, you know, he could not run away from his duty, you know, that God gave to him. You know, he, for whatever reason, didn't want to do his job, you know, and he decided to run away from it, which was kind of silly, you know, considering the fact that, you know, God chose you as a messenger. And I mean, whatever duty God has chosen anyone for, I mean, who are we to refuse, you know? It, you know, first of all, um, that applies to all of us in the sense that, you know, we all are obligated to worship God alone, and we all are obligated to do our tasks, our duties, daily duties, and, you know, other things, other obligations as submitters to God, you know. So we cannot run away from them, and you know, knowing what God expects of us, we have to fulfill those obligations, whether it's doing your daily contact prayers, or, you know, reading the Quran, or anything that's, you know, related to being righteous. We have to obey God, you know, unconditionally. I mean, and uh, when I say unconditionally, I mean under all circumstances. So we have to do that. But Jonah thought for a while that, you know, he could just, you know, get away with not doing his job as a messenger, and as a consequence of that, you know, the fish, giant fish, swallowed. I'm saying giant because Jonah was able to fit in. It was big enough that Jonah was able to fit in the belly of that fish. So the fish has to be, you know, big enough, and he stayed in the belly, uh, you know, until he realized that, you know, what a mess he got himself into. I mean, imagine being inside the stomach of a fish, you know. I mean, uh, fish as it is, you know, but inside the stomach of a fish, I mean, it has to be horrible. Uh, and for him to be trapped in there, you know, I mean, would be a traumatic experience for Jonah. So he realized, but he meditated on God and asked God, you know, that unless, you know, God would forgive him, like, you know, he would really be hurting his soul. And uh, you know, God actually answered his prayer and forgave him because he started meditating on God. And God tells us here that if he didn't do that, you know, he would have stayed in the belly of the fish forever, like, until he died. Um, you know, and And it says actually until the day of resurrection. So, you know, which is interesting. But then eventually God had him thrown up into the desert. Uh, and not only that, but God had a tree of fruit planned and grown for him. You know, God knew that this would be the place where there's a tree, or this is the place where the fish would throw him. So he had a tree grown for him over there already, uh, of edible fruit. You know, fruit that could be consumed by humans, and eaten, so he could nourish himself after this exhausted experience. Um, and and then there's a footnote for uh, verse 147, which says, "Then we sent him to 100,000 or more." And the footnote says, the Quran mentions 30 numbers: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 19, 20, 30, and so forth, up to 100,000. Uh, the sum of these numbers is 162,146, or 19 times 8,534. See Appendix 1. So all the numbers that are mentioned in the Quran, if you add them up, their sum is a multiple of 19. That's why, you know, it doesn't say, for example, it doesn't give us the, like, God knows the exact number of how many people he sent him to, right? But it says 100,000 or more. I mean, it could be 100,020, right? For example, but you know, if you added that other 20 in there, it wouldn't be a multiple of 19. So it says 100,000 or more, and that number is a multiple of 19, subhanAllah. And then it says that, you know, these people believed and God let them enjoy this life, you know. So that shows us that, you know, if we believe God's message and a messenger, and we lead a righteous life, we will enjoy our lives too in this world, and the hereafter. And as you know, we know our heaven and hell begins here. So you can't be suffering miserably through hell in this world and then just all of a sudden enter paradise. You know, God will let you, after you prove yourself as a believer who worships God under all circumstances, including good and bad, and healthy and unhealthy, and rich and poor. You know, you will enter into God's kingdom where you'll have no problems at all in your life, and you'll enjoy this life, uh, starting in this world, and then it will continue on until you go into the hereafter, which is amazing. Um, uh, okay, so God willing, I will continue reading 149. Ask them if your Lord has daughters while they have sons. Did we create the angels to be females? Did they witness that? Indeed, they grossly blaspheme when they say, God has begotten a son. Indeed, they are liars. Did he choose the girls over the boys? What is wrong with your logic? Addressing the disbelievers, why do you not take heed? Do you have any proof? Show us your book if you are truthful. They even invented a special relationship between him and the jinns. The jinns themselves know that they're subservient. They even invented a special. Okay. God be glorified, far above their claims. Only God's servants who are absolutely devoted to him alone are saved. Indeed, you and what you worship cannot impose anything on him. Only you will burn in hell. Okay. So these verses refer to people, you know, attributing lies to God, and people attributing lies and creating, you know, any lie attributed to God is a blasphemy, right? And you know, saying that God has daughters uh, is a blasphemy. Saying that God has, you know, created the angels as females is a blasphemy, because they don't even know, like, you know, if they even have genders. You know, I mean, we have genders here because we have to reproduce, you know, man and a woman to create children. But what makes these people think that the angels are girls, especially coming from people who consider women to be inferior to men, you know. And um, I mean, I mean, also like when people talk about fairies, I mean, you know, they almost describe them as angels except they're women. So I think that's kind of similar to that concept. Um, and Also, they grossly blaspheme when they say God has begotten a son. You know, so I mean, this, as we know, is extremely. It's a gross blasphemy. God says the earth has shattered. You know, and I mean that allegory is pretty intense. Be, you know, because they said the God's begotten a son. I was paraphrasing that verse, but um, it's a gross blasphemy. So if you know, and it's so absurd when you really think about it. You know, the more you think about it, and it's especially absurd because you know God is uh, you know unfathomably um, you know omnipotent and great, you know, both in size and his power and his magnificence, and you're putting him next to a creature that God created that is nothing in comparison to God, and literally almost nothing in comparison to God. And you know, he was sent as a messenger of God, and you know, God doesn't need to. Um, God is everlasting. He doesn't need to, you know, have a generation of of himself to extend him in that matter. I mean, he doesn't need a wife. He doesn't need any partner. You know, it's humans. You know, we need these things, but obviously God doesn't. He's and You know, when people say that, you know, God. I mean, this is absurd. Every time, you know. Um, I hear it, it just irritates me a lot. All right. And so imagine like uh, how it's just a fabricated lie. Um, you know, I mean, it doesn't even make sense when you think about the theories that they make around it, right? When they say like, oh, well, God loved us so much that he gave us his son and he sacrificed him so we could be saved. I mean, that doesn't even logically make sense, right? I mean, having someone die doesn't isn't gonna get anybody forgiven, first of all. You know? So it doesn't even make sense. And then obviously for them to think that, you know, it's just as well, it's not as bad, but it's still absurd and it's horrible. I mean, for someone to think, for example, we were talking about 2 weeks ago, we were talking about, or last week, we were, no, 2 weeks ago, yeah, we were talking about anybody who thinks that God would want Abraham to kill his son, right? And then if that's not enough that we're saying that God would have a son, we're saying that God would have a son and then he would kill his son, you know, to save all of us, which is so gross. I mean, why would anyone kill their son to begin with, you know? And why would God have a son to begin with? You know, there's so many things that are so wrong on so many levels about this. And But it's amazing how Satan has hypnotized people all over the world. There's, you know, billions of people that are following this religion and following this lie, and to them it sounds beautiful. You know, and that's the scary part, is that because their hearts don't believe in the hereafter. You know, to them it sounds beautiful. Or like, you know, but it's so absurd in reality. You know, I mean, can you imagine how big God is, and can you try to compare that? I mean, even just in size, and try to think about it in infinity and compare it to Jesus. I mean, um, but you know, to a lot of these people, he's God, and you know, I mean, it's sad for these people because they're going to end up in hell. But you know, the lesson for us here is to not ascribe partners to God, any kind of partners, whether any kind of relationship with the with the jinns, for example. They invented a relationship with the jinns as well, uh, even though, I mean, they have no share with God in anything, you know. I mean, these people worship all kinds of, gods with the small g, and, they're jinns, they have these gods and goddesses, you know, of this and that, and they're just worshiping the jinns. I mean, these people are claiming to be, gods, and they're lying, and these people are worshiping them. You know, some of these jinns might even be dead that they're worshiping as well, and some might even be alive, but um, nevertheless, they don't have a proof. I mean, they don't have a proof about God having a son. I mean, and this also goes to all the people who want to adhere to the Bible as a source of religious guidance in any way. We know the Bible has been corrupted to have such a gross lie. So why would you want to rely on a source that's tampered with in any way? In that uh, for something as vital as God's laws for yourself. So, Bible is, word of God was revealed to God, revealed by God to his messengers, uh, with the Old Testament and the New Testament. But, it's been tampered with, severely. And I mean, there's 90% of the Bible is the truth, and then the 10% of it is nonsense. But the millions and millions of people are following that 10%, unfortunately. And sadly, some of the submitters are also following part of it now, which is even worse, considering they call themselves submitters. But this is, God is letting us know that, we should always worship God alone under all circumstances. And God is far above these claims that these humans have made. And if anybody idolizes any of these idols besides God and fabricate any of these lies, God says that they cannot change the facts. They cannot impose any of these lies on God, and these are the only people that are going to burn in hell. And God says it, right? Okay, so God willing, I'll continue. Subtitle: The Angels, verse 164. The angels. Each one of us has a specific job. We are the arrangers. We have duly glorified our Lord. Uh, So this whole surah is titled "The Arrangers," and from these verses, we know that the angels are the arrangers, and um, uh, and this is referring to the arrangers as in uh, people being stratified into three kinds. Um, and let me look up the verse, which it is we which is refers to. One second. This is uh, the arrangers. Yeah, this is Surah 37, verse 1. It says, "The arrangers in columns," um, and so I believe this could be referring to people being stratified into three kinds on the day of judgment, and the angels arranging them, possibly. Um, but it says each one of us has a specific job. So all these angels that are sent by God, they have a specific job assigned to them in this world also. Uh, for example, there are angels who drive the clouds, to different lands, and there's many angels that are assigned for our protection in this world, and so they're all doing tasks that God wanted these angels to do, when God said that, fall prostrate before Adam, and they all did. Um, and so, they agreed to being subservient to God, and doing these duties, especially, I mean, here too. Um, and angels are, the creatures, obviously, that never sided with Satan. So, and they glorify God. We know from the Quran, they glorify God day and night without ever tiring. Following the parents blindly, they used to say, had we received the correct instructions from our parents, we would have been worshippers devoted to God alone. But they disbelieved, and they will surely find out. Victory for the messenger is guaranteed. Our decision is already decreed for our servants, the messengers. They're surely the victors. Our soldiers are the winners. So disregard them for a while. Watch them. They too will watch. Do they challenge our retribution? When it hits them one day, it will be a miserable day. They have been sufficiently warned. Disregard them for a while. Watch them. They too will watch. Glory be to your Lord, the great Lord, far above their claims. Peace be upon the messengers. Praise be to God, Lord of the universe. Okay. So, um, I mean, verse 167 obviously talks about again, the great human tragedy, which is, following the parents blindly. If you're born in any specific cult, it's very difficult for people to think independently for themselves, and you know decide for themselves what they want to follow. I mean, if someone born as a quote unquote, so-called Muslim, identifies himself as a Muslim for the majority of the cases, and same goes for any religion, Hindus, Christians, Buddhists, most people will stick to their parents' religion, and that's how they identify themselves. And especially, I mean, if you're, well, not especially, but yeah, I mean, if you're Jewish too, it's like a same. I mean, Jewish are the only people most likely who are like known to, carry their religion based on their ancestry. Uh, you know, uh, but it goes for any religion where, if you're born, like when people are born Muslims, they automatically consider themselves a Muslim, even if they don't even know what it means to be a Muslim, which they don't, most of them, anyways. And or they wouldn't be following anything, right? But you ask them what's your religion, and they will tell them the religion that their parents have, for example. Of course, now things are changing, and more people are letting go of their parents' religions because of the nonsense that is found in those religions, and people are catching up with the information in this information age, with all the technology and information we have at our fingertips. But most people will not take the time to even do that. They're so absorbed in this worldly life, and they'll just, try to ease themselves just by comforting themselves, just by saying that they have any religion, and some people will not even do that. But most people will follow their parents blindly, if you, and that's human nature, in the sense that, when you see the children, they tend to follow their parents without thinking. I mean, and you can, I mean, see that with children, right? I mean, if you are a submitter and you tell your children things about religion, more than likely, I mean, they will accept a lot of it without even questioning, as facts. And that's what people do. I mean, they see their parents uh, following nonsense, and they just keep following that, and they say, well, this is what our parents did, so this is what we're going to do. Obviously, I mean, they don't listen to their parents and other things, but when it comes to religion, as Adam was saying the other week, that they want to follow their parents, which is funny, I think. um, and God has guaranteed victory for all of his messengers, as we can see from verse 171 and 170 to 173. You know, God's so this is a um, you know consoling all these messengers that they went through all this persecution and name calling uh, in this world as they were, preaching to people. We know how hostile people become to God's messengers. Some of them, God says they rejected. Others they killed. Including the messenger of the covenant and other messengers like Jesus. They thought they killed him, but they crucified his body nevertheless. But even then, even when they got to that level to do that, to kill and stab the body, they cannot harm any of these messengers against God's will, and these messengers didn't suffer at all in this world. The truth is that their lives were terminated before any kind of physical torment of death affected their bodies. And so they came to them, they gave people the message, the people laughed at them, did all kinds of persecution and scheming against them, and then eventually they were able to finish their job successfully as messengers of God, even though they thought they hampered their efforts, but by killing them. But they did their job, and the message was delivered, which was all they really had to do. For example, if you look at the example of Jesus' message was to just deliver the message itself. His job wasn't to convert everybody, for example, right? So he did his job, and then he got his reward. As we know, he's living active, a utopian, beautiful, blissful life in paradise, right? So what bigger victory than that for all of God's messengers? Don't we all long for such a victory? I mean, um, what else could anybody want? Than having an eternal life with everything they wanted, close to God, with all these blessings, So that's God's system. That if you follow God's system, if you follow God's laws, you do what God tells you to do, you obey Him. The believers also, if they lead a righteous life, God guarantees victory for the believers too. So that goes for everyone, all of us. That if we continue steadfastly and persevere through our lives in worshiping God alone under all circumstances, make God our God, follow His guidance, God will surely, grant us victory in this world and in the hereafter. Um, and So God will now continue to Surah 38. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Surah 38, As-Sad. Uh, As-Sad, and the Quran that contains the proof. Uh, those who disbelieved have plunged into arrogance and defiance. Many a generation before them we annihilated. They called for help in vain. And the footnote says the initial Sad occurs in Surah 7, 19, and 38, a total of 152 times. That's 19 times 8. And then the Quran that contains the proof, the word in Arabic is zikr. So it says the word zikr is made distinct from the Quran and clearly uh, points out at the Quran's miraculous mathematical code. See these verses 15, 6, 9, 16, 44, no, Surah 15, verse 6, verse 9, Surah 16, verse 44, 21, 2, and 24, and Surah 26, verse 5, and 36, 11, and 69. Um, so, um, So we can see in this chapter, the entire chapter is titled by the initial Sod. And if you count the occurrence of the Arabic letter Sod in this surah, it's a multiple of 19. Um, and it's 19 times 8 actually. In So it's one of the surahs that has interlocking relationship. Um, and if you count all the initials uh, in all the surahs where Saad is mentioned, that ends up being a multiple of 19. And this is actually, uh, we can find that in Appendix 1. And if you look at Appendix 1 for all the initials, uh, Saad, yes. So, yeah, so, and then not only that, I mean, if you have all these initials in all of these surahs, and you add their frequencies and their geometrical values for the entire Quran, that ends up being a multiple 19. And I mean, there's obviously so many facets of this miracle, uh, so God calls it the proof of the Quran, the mathematical miracle. And But the way it's described here, clearly just distinguishes the Quran from zikr, because many people will just say, well, Quran is zikr, and they just mindlessly recite it, obviously, because of that. But in this verse, it's referring to the Quran's mathematical proof. And you can read more about it in Appendix 1, but after reading that, I mean, you know why the Quran, why it's called the proof. They wondered, verse 4, they wondered that a warner should come to them from among them. The disbelievers said, a magician, a liar. Did he make the gods into one god? This is really strange. The leaders announced, go and steadfastly persevere in worshiping your gods. This is what is desired. We never heard of this from the religion of our fathers. This is a lie. Why did the proof come down to him instead of us? Indeed, they are doubtful of my proof. Indeed, they have not yet tasted my retribution. Do they own the treasures of mercy of your Lord, the Almighty, the Granter? Do they possess the sovereignty of the heavens and the earth and everything between them? Let them help themselves. Instead, whatever forces they can muster, even if all the parties banded together, will be defeated. Disbelieving before them were the people of Noah, Ad, and the mighty Pharaoh. Also Thamud, the people of Lot, the dwellers of the woods of Midian. Those were the opponents. Each of them disbelieved the messengers, and thus my retribution was inevitable. These people can expect a single blow from which they can never recover. They challenged, our Lord, why do you not rush the retribution for us before the day of reckoning? Okay, so God willing, I will stop at verse 16. Um, so, I mean, the disbelievers, first of all, find the idea of one God to be very strange, which is obviously they're the ones who are hurting their souls. They're the ones who are lying, because we have the natural instinct of worshiping one God. So it should be very natural. It's nothing strange about that. Obviously, it should be very natural for anybody to come to that realization, especially if you're born with that natural instinct, to know that, only one person, one entity can control everything that is in perfect harmony, right? If you if you have an organization with like multiple leaders, like multiple CEOs, I mean, you can imagine like what kind of chaos that would be, because every CEO or every president, for that matter, would be doing his own thing, right? And there'd be chaos, and but we see the entire universe is in perfect harmony. And the only place we find chaos is on this earth where Satan's trying to be a god and he can't control anything and everything's falling apart for him. But everywhere in the entire rest of the universes, you know, things are in perfect, uh, mm, you know, uh, perfect symphony. It's perfect harmony. So, which proves to us that there's only one creator of the universes. However, these people find it strange because they're accustomed to, their own lies. And one of the things that they question when they get a messenger is what we see in verse 8, the human jealousy. All right. Why did it come to him instead of us? And so God is telling them, like, who are you? Who are we to make that, to question God in that matter? I mean, who assigns God's mercies? Is it them or is it God? Because God is the one who's the God, so He's going to decide who gets to be the messenger, not us. And He knows, obviously, who's best suited to deliver His message. And so when He chooses a messenger, this becomes a test for a lot of people because of their egos. um, and Obviously, because, and when it does, rightfully so, they fail, because they should know that all kingship, all power belongs to God. I mean, you and I are nobody to decide who this should come to, who should be a messenger and who shouldn't be a messenger. I mean, it's God who makes that decision. He's the one who does all the choosing. So uh, and then these people obviously are just um, you know um destroying themselves without perceiving, as we can see. And God says, whatever forces they can muster, even if they all band together against God, I mean, they will be defeated. And we have examples, obviously, of Noah, Ad, Pharaoh, Thamud, people of Median. All these examples are provided for us to learn from. These were all opponents. Many of them were powerful. They had armies to protect them and stuff, like in the case of Pharaoh, for example. And nothing helped them, of course, against God. The, and The retribution is inevitable for these people, So in today's time, also, I mean, we can see that, people who are not following God, the retribution is inevitable. They eventually, get their annihilation one way or another, and they end up miserably in this world. uh, and They're obviously unhappy throughout their lives as well. And God says the miserable life is unavoidable for the disbelievers. So they have misery here, and the misery continues. I mean, people might look happy, of course. Look at some people, and they look very quote unquote successful. But you can talk to the most successful people when they're in when they're honest about it. I mean, they will tell you that they're not happy, if they're honest about it. If they're not believing, the only way for us to achieve happiness in this life and is to worship God, is to obey Him and to follow Him, um, and glorify Him. And that's the only way to become successful in this world. So with this, I'd like to end. God willing, if you guys have any questions or comments, feel free. Thank you.
Masha Allah, Salman. Great study, by the way.
Thank you, Masha Allah.
Um, you have explained everything very well, Masha Allah.
Yeah, mashallah, brother, very good job. Thank you. Praise God.
Thank you.
Excellent study. Very good. I have kind of a lot of things that jump out at me. One of the things that I wanted to touch upon was this idea of meditation. I will sometimes bring that up in the submitter forums. And I think people are kind of like, where are you going with this idea of meditation? But it is something that's mentioned in the Quran. I was wondering if any of you had any thoughts or ideas about this question of meditation. Now, for what I understand, we meditate for extra credit at night. So I'll turn off my mic and hopefully you guys can comment. Thank you.
Right. Well, I mean, if nobody else has a comment, I could go ahead. But I mean, I don't really understand like what you mean when they say, well, where are you going with this idea of meditation? I mean, they they're saying you can't meditate or what?
Yeah, it seems like it's an alien concept to them, this idea of meditation. I think that has to do with popular culture and this idea of getting into the lotus position and doing these kind of esoteric type of
You mean,
motions.
okay. Well, I mean, with submitters, it's kind of hard to, I mean, imagine they would think that. But when we talk about meditation, obviously we're talking about meditating on God, meditating on His attributes, commemorating Him, remembering Him, and reflecting on God. I mean, it's not about nothingness as they teach us. So, uh, zikr, or meditating on God, commemorating Him in this manner is one of God's most beloved forms of worship, as we know it. So, and you don't have to just do it at night; you can do it at any time throughout the day.
Can I also make a
Yeah,
comment
sure.
on that? Yeah, this is, mashallah, our meditation is opposite to the nothingness, which is taught by, um, popular culture of how people do yoga or Buddhist way of doing it, um, and some body movements and whatnot, if that's what they mean. Our meditation is actually mindfulness of God and His attributes, and it can come in many forms. We can do it while we're standing, driving the car, and deep meditation um, when you're alone. And during that time, you can commemorate God by doing zikr. Like there is a recorded zikr uh, example of Rasha doing on Night of Destiny. Or you can go in deep thoughts and be connected with God, and which involves repentance, reflections, um, prostrating, asking for forgiveness, and or thanking Him. Anything about God and making a connection with Him on a deeper level uh, is meditation. Yeah.
I'm going to switch topics here a little bit. Solomon talked about the fact that there's no references. Well, at least I can't find any references to female angels. Is that correct? When we're talking about angels, it seems that they're always presented in the Quran as male. Uh, any
Uh,
comments on that?
I didn't say they're presented as males, but I said it does. Well, God doesn't say they're males or females, right? Because we said we have genders, but we don't know how it is in the hereafter. So we need genders here to reproduce, right? So, but we can't say they're males or females for that matter.
So, like, for example, I don't find any references to female angels. I find a reference to Michael, to
Right,
Gabriel, but not a female name.
right. Well, and Michael and Gabriel, their names given to men in this world, but doesn't make the angels men just because
Right.
people on this earth are men,
But angels might not require any gender because,
Yeah.
those are souls or spirits in a different dimension. We don't even know if they
Yeah.
have any gender. That's what they
Yeah.
do. People that they assign even gender to God being the Father,
Hmm.
and Jesus being the Son, and then female names. God is just asking, like, how do you know if they are, females? Or, while if you want to call them female, you like for yourself. That is like a sarcastic or rhetorical question by God, that while you yourself desire for male boys, but you assigning God female daughters, like, what is wrong with you? God does not need any. At God's, we have no idea in what form these creatures are, right?
Hmm.
Um, they are
Yeah, it's like,
creatures. Hmm.
yeah, I mean, it's like you build a computer. I mean, does the computer to do a certain job? I mean, does the computer have to be male or female? No, it's just the computer that does its job. It doesn't have to be anything, right? You create a lamp, for example. You build a lamp. You need some light, let's say. Do you have to assign a gender? I mean, there has to be a reason for things, right? So angels are these creatures that are extremely powerful, but we don't need genders. Uh, we need genders. I mean, we need genders because we have to reproduce and continue on Earth. But in the hereafter, I mean, when you think about that dimension, I mean, people don't reproduce and have children and stuff like that. So why would they have genders? Angels specifically are, there's no mention of angels being males or females in the Quran. So, I mean, males are, referring to something as male in the Quran, for example, doesn't necessarily make it male or female. For example, in the Arabic language and many languages, there's things that have genders, like in Urdu and Arabic and all these other languages, everything has a gender, like your hair uh, is male, and like for example um the cup is female, for example. I mean, the cup doesn't have a gender, but it's referred to in linguistic terms. You use the when
Cattle
you
has a
yeah,
gender.
right. Well, cattle has a gender.
Yeah, cattle is female.
Right. But I mean, cattle actually has gender, right? There's male and female that reproduce.
No, no, the cattle you boil the water in.
Oh, the kettle. I thought you were talking about the cattle.
No,
Right. Yeah, the kettle has a gender. Exactly. The jug.
the
Everything has a
jug is
gender.
male, the cattle is
Yeah.
female.
Yeah. But in the Quran, as far as the Quran is concerned, God doesn't say they're males or females. So
Thank you so much for that. I
okay.
probably am limiting myself in the way I'm approaching that topic. Also, it's correct then to assume that God, Allah, is neither male nor female, but yet in the Quran we repeatedly see where he is referred to as he, as him. Um, I'm so he has no gender.
Yeah, actually, it doesn't necessarily imply gender. Yeah. So we can't say that God has a gender. I mean, how can God have a gender? I mean, you have a gender against something you can compare it to, even, right? So if there's one of something that can't have a gender, you know what I mean? You're talking about something that's only one in itself, so it
Yeah,
can't
Masha
possibly
Allah.
So
have a
we
gender.
so we limit, or I limit myself when I
Hmm.
uh, read too much into those particular terms.
Yeah, exactly.
People who have assigned a gender to God, they have created even many traditional Muslims think that God has created human in his image, which is a common Christian and Muslim belief, I believe, which is wrong. God has never said in Quran that he created us in his image. Th- Absolutely, that's impossible. His image, nobody, God, even like, for example, when God sends angels disguised on earth, they come as human beings, right? Because angel would not be able to come here as being the angel who knows their size. Like Rashad has described, an angel could be larger than like even a planet, so huge. So of course that is limiting God, and we should never have an image of God, because we really have no idea of this entity, how awesome it is. And yeah, there is no, I think um I think he in Arabic, isn't it like he and her? I have to, we have to find this special, certain things have no gender actually,
Hmm.
like he and her would be for the same, I think so,
Yeah.
but I could be wrong.
Yeah, God willing, I'd like to read the last paragraph of Appendix 4. I think that might be helpful. It says the Appendix 4, which just says, why was the Quran revealed in Arabic? And it says, another possible reason for choosing Arabic is the fact that, quote, unquote, he and she does not necessarily imply gender. Thus, when God is referred to as he, this does not imply gender at all. God be glorified, he is neither male nor female. The usage of he to refer to God in the English language, for example, has contributed to a false image of God. This was not helped by such distorted expressions as Father when referring to God. You never find such a reference to God in the Quran.
Masha Allah, thank you.
MashaAllah.
Thank you guys very much for that. I'm going to switch topics here a little bit. Talk a little bit about that God did not have a son. Okay. Um, that they did not kill him and they did not crucify him. It seems that in our talks and our discussions, we always seem to assume part of that narrative is correct. Like we'll assume that Jesus was crucified, but only his body was crucified. I am uncomfortable with that a little bit because it says in the Quran that they didn't kill him and they didn't crucify him. For me, that's ended the story. And then when people will like try to say, well, they crucified him, but they only killed his body and all of this stuff.
What does crucifixion mean to you when they say they crucified them? Like, what
Oh,
do you think they mean?
I mean, well, what I mean is that the Roman torture method, where they will hang him up, and I believe it's putting the nails through the wrist. In popular depictions, it's through the hand, but your body would fall out. So it would be like to be literally nailed up there on that cross and stuff.
Okay,
Uh,
so I'm gonna read. Okay, I got you. So, I think you've mentioned that before, if I'm not mistaken, in one of the comments in the past. But actually, this is confirmed by the Messenger of the Covenant also. If you go to Surah 3, verse 54, it says, subtitled The Death of Jesus. It says, they plotted and schemed, but so did God, and God is the best schemer. And the footnote says, we learn that Jesus' soul, the real person, was raised. That is, Jesus' life on earth was terminated prior to the arrest, torture, and crucifixion of his empty, soulless, but physiologically living body. So, so yes, his body was crucified, but it was empty, soulless body. So Jesus himself, the real person, was not crucified because his soul did not suffer through all of this. He was already taken up. He already ascended to God, So in that sense, his body was crucified, and that's what the Quran confirms as well. And that's, I mean, historically speaking, obviously, there's no nothing as far as the Quran is concerned. It's very clear. And then look at also Jesus' death inside Appendix 22. It's pretty detailed, and it says Jesus' death. It says this is the single most controversial subject in the world. The Quran's miraculous mathematical code has not provided the final answer to this topic. And then it says Jesus' soul was raised, that is, he was put to death prior to the arrest and crucifixion of his body. Thus his persecutors arrested, tortured, and crucified an empty body. Jesus was already gone to the world of souls. And then references are for 355 and 4157. So they plotted and schemed, but so did God, and God is the best schemer. The God said, "O Jesus, I am putting you to death and raising you to me. I will save you from the disbelievers." They claim that and for the Messiah, the son of Mary, the messenger of God. In fact, they never killed him. They never crucified him. They were led to believe that they did, right? So in that sense, it's referring to they were led to believe that by crucifying the body, they were led to believe that they crucified him. When they put him through the nails, they were led to believe that they tortured Jesus. But what they were doing, the real Jesus was gone out of the body. They were just torturing his empty garment, right? So in that sense, he was not crucified. And that goes for any believer. If any believer is put to that kind of a tormenting experience, for death, I mean, God will take them away before they feel the impact of any of this.
Thank you for that. I really hope that that is also the case with the messenger of the covenant. As you know, he was assassinated.
Of course, and without any doubt, yes.
Blood was all over the place, and it really bothers me. If you don't mind, I'd like to talk about a little topic that we covered in the last Quran study. If you don't mind, I'll make it brief.
Can I make a quick comment on the last part? That it goes against the attribute of the most merciful, that he will torture a body to this point. We've seen a movie, and that Jesus was tortured. I forgot the name. So the point is that nowadays you can, that one, yes. So nowadays we can see that a person can go through a major surgery where they open up his whole chest, and there are multiple of surgeons working, and this person is not even present. He is probably sleeping, dreaming, enjoying somewhere in his dreams, but his body is being tortured and opened up and then sewed back together, and he doesn't even know. If science can do it, just imagine with God. He can do whatever. We can see the people lay in ICU, neuro ICU units, and their soul has been gone, but their body is still pumping blood and is a living, alive body with all the functions going, and they preserve the body until their organs have been arranged. So all these things, if science can do it, just imagine with what God can do. It's it's beyond our even imagination. So that's my comment.
MashaAllah, that's a good point, Adam.
MashaAllah. Yeah, I mean, and I'd say it's the same thing about Schroeder's, right? The guy that it talks about is it's in it says merciful. It's in the same appendix. I was just going to read it. Actually, it says, "Mercifully, God has given our generation a living example of a person whose soul departed this world, but his body continued to live for 19 months. On November 25th, 1984, doctors at Humana Hospital of Louisville, Kentucky, removed the diseased heart of Mr. William Schroeder and replaced it with a plastic and metal pump." Refers to the New York Times from Monday, November 26, 1984. It says, "On the 19th day after this historic operation, Thursday, December 13th, 1984, Mr. Schroeder, the soul, the real person, departed this world. Mr. Schroeder died, but his body continued to function with the artificial heart implanted in his body. The world was told that, quote unquote, he probably suffered a stroke. The New York Times, December 14th, 1984. Significantly, only one day before Mr. Schroeder's departure, he talked with the President Ronald Reagan on national TV and demanded that the Social Security Administration send his overdue check. He was perfectly alert. From the moment he, quote unquote, suffered a stroke, he did not recognize the day or time, nor his family members. In fact, Mr. Schroeder was no longer in this world. The Gospels clearly state that the arrested body of Jesus was oblivious to the events surrounding it. The chief priest, meanwhile, brought many accusations against Jesus. As, Pilate, I don't know if I'm not butchering this word, interrogated him again, or Pilate interrogated him again. Surely you have some answer. See how many accusations they are leveling against you. But greatly to his surprise, Jesus made no further response. This is Mark 15, 3-5. So Herod was extremely pleased to see Jesus. From the reports about him, he had wanted for a long time to see him, and he was hoping to see him work some miracles. He questioned Jesus at considerable length, but Jesus made no response. The chief priests and scribes were at hand to accuse him vehemently. Herod and his guards then treated him with contempt and insult. This is Luke 23, 8-11. It says, the Savior said to me, he whom you saw on the tree, glad and laughing, this is the living Jesus, but this one into whose hands and feet they drive the nails is the fleshly part. This is Apocalypse of Peter 7, 381 from the Nag Hammadi Library. Okay, so that's it.
So the whole idea of when God must have, um, God has described in Quran, and maybe that's the idea of Jesus being resurrected, that Christian believe that he was resurrected 3 days later, was seen in the markets and this and that. And then Muslims think he will be resurrected before the end of the world. Because God talked about him being at God, never dying, right? So that idea has been so distorted in so many ways. And that applies to any righteous soul. Is like the example of that person who said, I wish my people knew that he never suffered death. They are many of God's messengers God talks about in the Quran were um, tortured and killed. And some believers were burnt alive and people sat around them and watched them burning. God would not let them suffer. That's God's promise. They will not suffer any kind of that sort of torture. So their soul and body are two different entities, as we know now. And even if the body apparently seems like it's moving, suffering, soul is, already taken out, Masha Allah.
I was just looking at Appendix 17, death, and I'm looking at the bottom half of it, and it looks like, this includes, this is the following is a reproduction of I'm reading the fourth paragraph. It says, the following is a reproduction of the lead article from February 1990 issue of Submitter's Perspective, the monthly bulletin of the United Submitter's Perspective, and mailed ahead of time. In December 1989, Dr. Khalifa was martyred on January 31st, 1990, and his soul was directly taken to paradise. And then, it talks about the verses about righteous do not really die, which we're talking about. So, I mean, this is very good information in this article presented by the Messenger of the Covenant in the Submitter's Perspective. However, I'm just thinking that if the messenger of the while the messenger, I mean, the messenger of the covenant did not tell anyone to include this thing in the Quran as under Appendix 17 because he already passed away at that time, right? So he just wrote this article that was ready to be published, and then he passed away. So, you know, why was this even included in the under the Appendix 17 in that after that?
That is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's also they also included a preface also, and which I didn't think that was obviously by the messenger because it again says the same thing, you know that. So, but yeah, this I also find it kind of because it's talking about death, and this is this verse. I mean, the article that they published, it talks about righteous not dying, but that's already uh, mentioned in elsewhere. Um, so I just think that some people did this. Uh, anyways, yeah, Robert, I think you had more questions.
Just to add one more thing is that the God is mentioned in Bible as loving God, and this puts another question. I mean, red flag that why would a most merciful, loving God would need his son to sacrifice for the sin of the whole humanity? I mean, does he have limits? Can he just not forgive all these people without having his son? Suppose, I mean, just if they believe that he has a son, a loving God will torture his own son to that point, the bloodshed and all that, to forgive their sins. I mean, this is just out of our human capacity, even think like that.
Yeah, those
Definitely a satanic
Christianity
idea.
is very confused with this idea. Sorry, go ahead, Robert.
Definitely a very satanic idea. I really appreciate you guys speaking on this issue. Yeah, I was aware of the appendix, but I just wanted to see once what you guys were saying on this, and I really appreciate your responses. I'm going to refer now to last week's Quran study, or what is it, 3 days ago or something? But it was fantastic. The brother from Malaysia did an outstanding job. I mean, still
Malaysia?
swimming, my mind is swimming around on that issue. Okay, so
You said
we had
Malaysia.
two people.
Well, he's not from
We had
Malaysia.
two people.
All right.
Oh, he
Sorry.
isn't? Okay. All right, I'm sorry. I thought he was in Malaysia, but okay. So we had the two people. Well, we were talking about Abraham, his test last week. But there were two people that were enduring that test. One was Abraham, of course. The other one was Ishmael. And I think we kind of glossed over Ishmael a little bit. But you might ask, well, what type of test are you talking about here? Well, let's think about this. Your dad comes to you and says that I had this dream, gives you the whole "I have a dream" speech, and then wants to proceed to take you out into the woods. It's like I don't. I'm trying to think of how I would react in that situation if I was Ishmael. Now I'm assuming that Ishmael is old enough, rational enough to be able to have a conversation with his father. Children are very intelligent. They know exactly what we're talking about sometimes. And so Ishmael's reaction was quite startling to me. My deal would have been, hey, let's talk about this, Dad. Once you slide that knife across the throat and my mouth is filled up with blood and I start drowning, it's too late to change our minds at that point. But instead, Ishmael is like, you know what? You're right, and I'm down with it. Let's go. As a matter of fact, I'll go get the knife. You go get whatever you got to get. We'll go. It's like his attitude is like mind blowing to me. It's not like he totally trusted in his father, which is commendable. I would like to think I would have that kind of courage, but his test was remarkable in and of itself, that he was willing to go out there all the way to the point of having his head laid down. Now, of course, God went ahead and provided the sacrifice for him. And one of the things that I'm having difficulties with, I'll be honest, that is this idea of that being a satanic dream. Now, you read further on it, and it talks about how God said you believed in that dream, and it was accounted to you as kind of like righteousness. So I'm a little conflicted in that, but I'll listen to what your guys might comment on that, and looking forward to that, actually, see what you guys are going to say. Thank you.
Well, Adam, if you wanted to make a comment, did you want to make a comment, or should I make the comment?
Go ahead, Salman.
Okay. Well, first, Adam is from Texas. He's not in Malaysia. When you talked about Malaysia, I thought you were talking about another submitter, but he's not been joining for a while. But yeah, Adam is in, what city are you in, Adam?
In Dallas area.
Yeah, Dallas. Okay. But okay, so so basically what I'm trying to understand the point of contention is that the fact that why was the dream satanic? You're saying why is it a satanic dream? Is that your
No,
question?
his question is like, if you further read it, God says you believed the dream.
Mm-hmm. So then why
So
was it
that
satanic?
why would this be satanic, and how? What makes it satanic? Okay.
Okay. Well, what makes it satanic is that God never advocates sin. You know, God would never advocate. You know, I mean, how could you advocate killing your son by showing him in a dream? You know, killing his son, that this is God's commandment. You know, God would be advocating that, yeah, you should kill your son for my approval, right? So that would be a sin because God never would advocate anything like that. But he believed the dream because he was in the sense that, you know, it was a test for him, which was allowed through in accordance with God's will. However, you know, Abraham passed his test because he was willing to do anything, in the sense that he was willing to do anything for God. You know, so in that way he believed the dream, and he actually was willing to do what it took to please God, even to, you know, sacrifice his own son in that way. So in that sense, yes, he believed the dream and he followed through. But it's not the part that he believed in a satanic dream that, you know, God is saying that, well, you believe the satanic dream, so, you know, I'm rewarding you. But it's the fact that, you know, he believed the dream, and he, to the point that he was actually willing to sacrifice. That was the real thing that he was being praised for here, in the so to speak, you know. So
You
So,
know the sorry.
mhm.
So you know, the last verse of Surah number 2, God says He only puts us the like sort of like the test that we can handle, and we can see Abraham, like person who already sat in the fire. He had seen the 4 birds flying back. I mean, he have seen a lot of miracles that his growth was way above our. We can't even imagine going through this kind of test, and his soul was grown to that level that God put him to that test. He knew that he can handle it. He would not put us through that kind of test, because he knows that we cannot handle that. It is extremely, this is, you know, this is his mercy. So he knew Abraham was that level, and Satan had claimed that Abraham, that God, you know, that Abraham doesn't love you that much. I mean, he loves his son more. That was his claim, which God wanted to disprove that no. So that's why God put him through that kind of severe test that we can't even imagine. Masha Allah, thank you.
Yeah, the thing is that God allows Satan to, if Satan makes a claim against somebody to God, that this person will not be able to handle this kind of situation. Maybe he loves his son too much, you know. So God knows that already, the future and everything. So God allows him to, okay, let's see what you can do. So obviously he passed that test. He thought it was from God, but God immediately, he said, see, the thing is, God will never advocate sin. God says life is sacred. God will never ask him to kill his son, go against his laws. Like, why would God does not need human sacrifice. So that is, absolutely against God's laws. So what Shashad has made the point very, he emphasized it, that those who believe that God ordered him in the dream to kill his son will never even be able to make it to heaven. He goes to that strength, that this is how severe this thinking is, that God would order him. God was doing all this, tricking him into killing his son, and then replaced it with the sheep or goat. The thing is, Satan gave him this idea. Of course, if God wanted, Abraham would not even have had this dream. God was watching that what Satan is doing to him, but that's how tests are. Like, God, if Satan makes a claim, God lets him go to a limit, not beyond a limit, you know. So the limit was up to where God intervened and removed Ishmael and replaced it with the goat. Yeah.
Yeah, like some people they do stunts and and you are the coach, you coach them or something, and if you know that they can do that stunt, you will put them through that severe stunt, where the average person will lose their life, but you have kind of confidence this person will go through it, so you will have them do it. And God Almighty already knew the future, just like for Jonah. God knows the future, so he knew all this process will take effect. So if far in the past, God already started growing this edible tree, and God knew this at that time. This will happen. This all the events will take place. And see, this is God's one of the attributes. Masha Allah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all your responses. That's given me a lot to think about. Um, Also, if you could comment on Ishmael, his test. I mean, he was willing to go all the way himself. I think that was counted for him as righteousness as well, and maybe um, put him in a position where, later on he was going to build the foundation of the Kaaba and become, I think, an imam himself. Um, any comments on that?
Yeah. Can I comment? Yeah. This was after this test. Um, God fulfilled. God rewarded Abraham because this was huge. This was a big, big task. And well, God calls Abraham a vanguard in submission, or father of submission or something. The first monotheist, and never was an idol worshiper. So imagine how his children would be growing under his wings, extremely righteous, fully confident of God's promise, and absolutely mu'min. So that's why Ishmael never hesitated. That's amazing to know. That God rewarded him and promised him. Where is that? Surah 2, 125, I believe. 1 minute. Okay, 1 second. So, um, Surah 2. Sorry, just looking for that verse. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So, Surah 2, verse 124, subtitle says Abraham. Recall that Abraham was put to the test by his Lord through certain commands, and he fulfilled them. God said, I am appointing you an imam for the people. He said, and also my descendants? He said, my covenant does not include the transgressors. Meaning, Abraham was asking for all descendants, like anybody who would come through his progeny. Obviously, God cannot promise that for those who would be transgressors, not like entire humanity.
Yeah.
So, and then
Sorry, go
God says, we have rendered the shrine a focal point for the people and a safe sanctuary. You may use Abraham's shrine as a prayer house. We commissioned Abraham and Ishmael. You shall purify my house for those who visit, those who live there, and those who bow and prostrate. So then Abraham prayed, my Lord, make this a peaceful land and provide its people with fruits, provide those who believe in God and the last day. God said, I will also provide for those who disbelieve. Subhanallah, how complete is Quran? That part of prayer, he wants to include that, all be blessed and all that. And God said, no, no, not those who will transgress. And here he's asking for those who just believe. God said, no, he will provide for everyone who disbelieve as well. Because once again, God uh, provides for everyone, subhanAllah. And then God fulfilled the covenant which he promised him, that he promised him that there will be imams from his descendants. Yeah, all these verses are talking about this. It goes on, and Abraham delivered all practices 127, and then 128. Yeah, all the way up to 135. Yeah. So that was huge. Those were huge tests. Um, no other uh, no other example of such tests. And so God rewarded him with, like, as we know, all the prophets and messengers came from Abraham's progeny, including Rashad, according to his dream, that he was from Abraham's lineage.
Thank you very much for that.
Masha Allah.
Just a quick question. Does the messengership and prophethood expires when somebody leaves this world, and that's only a sign for this world?
It doesn't expire. It just, the tense changes. He was a messenger. Obviously, after the death, we cannot say he is, right? Just that
Right, right.
the past tense and present tense. That's why the Shahada, Rashad, if you heard the great debate, right, with that Egyptian scholar, he said that if the tense doesn't make sense, if you know, it should be, if we were supposed to say it today, it would be in Nakana or something, where it means he is a messenger of God. He was a messenger of God.
Right,
So we cannot say he is, right?
Yeah.
right.
So a person dies, he was a messenger. Like throughout the history, when Quran tells us a history, God is saying he was. So and so
Right.
was a righteous messenger, he was a messenger, or. So God is not talking about previous messengers. How could we, right? So that
Right.
was a correction of tenses.
Another short question is that Swat in that Surah 38. In Surah 38, S is mentioned 29 times. Is that a correction, or all three surahs combined is multiple 19, not just Surah 38, right?
Yeah, many surahs where there is an initial, it would be the combination sometimes
Combination. Okay, just
of
want to
all the
clarify that.
Sod ones. Yeah. MashaAllah.
Today, Quran study started, and I just woke up and I'm laying in the bed and just trying to listen. All of a sudden, I jump out of the bed when I heard
Me too.
Solomon say, "Lord, practice, Masha Allah." I'm like, "What? What happened?"
People of Lot.
So turning back to a more serious topic of death, if we're ever confronted in a situation where we have to die for our belief, we shouldn't fear it. And if we do fear it, maybe we have a little problem in terms of our faith and belief.
Yeah, I mean, God says the believers are fearless, so we shouldn't. Not just death, but I mean anything. We shouldn't. Only thing believers should be fear is God. And that displeasing God. I mean, that's should be the real fear. But other than that, I mean, the believers are fearless. I mean, nothing can harm us against God's will. So if you have God on your side, you're always going to be protected. So you have nothing to worry about. If you have trust in God, that's it. And fear is from Satan. We know that devil inflicts fear into his subjects, and sometimes we fall prey to it. But we have to remind ourselves that fear is only from Satan. Whatever kind of fear it is in our hearts, that is, Satan's trying to prevent us from being somehow close to God by putting these types of fears and trying to get us to do what he wants by instilling fear.
But God says He will test us through money, children, fear, hunger,
Mhm.
loss of lives. So we could be tested in a situation which might really frighten us. But then our test would be that do we do we trust in God or not? You know, do we trust in God under all circumstances, or just in perfect situations we just say, "Wow, I trust in God." We will be put to the test. This situation might come that could be very fearful, but you know, um, we do trust in God. And actually, I was in a situation like that, um, where somebody, a racist KKK man, almost killed me. Um,
Oh,
it was so weird. 5 a.m. Do you want me to share this?
sure. Yeah, if you don't mind.
I
Sounds
I have
interesting.
so many weird stories in life. It was about 5 a.m. No, it's still very dark, and I was driving to Vermont. Was gonna drive with me and Shazi were gonna go. I was gonna pick her up from her house. So was putting. I went to put the gas in my car, the nearest station, a gas station, and then I saw lots of cars outside and the gas station inside. Somebody was there, and nobody could go inside. I'm like, what is going on? And I'm getting late. I have to pay. And the taxi guys who are usually awake at that time, this one guy just waved to me with his finger that don't go inside. Obviously, me, thick-headed, manic situation. I am like, what is inside? My curiosity. I see a guy, skinhead, with wearing like army boots and really screaming at this immigrant who was at the gas station and telling him all kinds of bad things that you go away and you this and that, take your boat, get the f out of here, every kind of swear words, really holding him like hostage. And what
Hmm.
do? I stand at the door and try to start taking a film of on my telephone. Oh my God. Suddenly, this guy opens the door, grabs me inside, and my brand new iPhone. he,
Oh my God.
he took the phone from my hand and he hit me.
Oh.
He brought his hand so high above my head. Like he hit me once, and the second time he was about to hit me. And looked him in the eye and I said, "Hey, man, take it easy, it's okay." I'm not one of those, because you're one of those terrorists too, you know. And so you were trying to film, and he threw my phone on the floor second time and put his boot on it.
Oh,
And
did the
literally,
phone break?
no, it didn't break, subhanallah.
Oh, subhanallah. That was
Subhanallah.
the old iPhones that
No,
those
no,
break
brand
easily.
new. 2 days ago, I was
Right.
actually more worried about the phone than
No,
myself.
but I mean the older ones were more fragile.
It was it was number 6,
Okay,
iPhone 6. Yeah. So then,
right.
honestly, a calm came over me. I absolutely fear was gone. Solomon, I cannot describe that.
Mm-hmm.
I was like half of this man's size,
Mm-hmm.
and I looked him in the eye and I said, "Hey, man, chill out. You know, we're not the enemy here." And his hand just stood there in the air. He held his
Mm-hmm.
phone for minutes,
Mm-hmm.
and then he threw it down and he goes, "I don't know." Literally, he said that, "I don't know why I didn't kill you." And then, yeah, and then
Wow.
and then I said, "Let me go. Let me go out." He let me
Mm-hmm.
go out. Then he was back at that the other guy again. So I come out, call the police,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, it was very, very strange situation. Like, nobody, the big guys, taxi guys, are sitting outside doing nothing about all of this. Nobody even called the police. This is so crazy.
Wow. Mm.
Yeah, so afraid. Anyway, later on, this guy was charged and he went to jail because I called. I
Oh,
went to,
subhanallah.
yeah. But my life was like, it could have been anything over there that night, anything.
Mm.
Yeah, and he was involved in such hate crimes even previously.
Mm.
So, yeah, this situation might come for everybody in a different way. If God says you will be tested, well, you will be tested.
Thank God you're okay.
Yeah, Alhamdulillah.
Yeah,
And
praise
God,
God.
gave me peace at that time. It's just like, because
Mm-hmm.
I chose not to be afraid, and then God just, where God says, "We withheld their hands of aggression towards you."
Mm-hmm.
Literally, he held the phone over my head for more than a minute, I would believe, and he just, he kept on making these sounds out of rage. He was. This is the time when Trump wasn't even elected, and he was making all these um,
Mm-hmm.
you know statements, and the effect was coming to Canada as well.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah, people were going crazy in Canada, all these white supremacists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's insane, the ripple
They
effect.
should be happy all these other people are there, so they're able to run the country and get taxes. Mm.
I know the Quran talks about the fact that we have shifts of angels that guard and protect us in accordance with God's will. And so I'm liking to think that God intervened in that situation and kept that individual from hurting you, or maybe it was the intervention of the angels, or maybe the intervention of the angels and God is the same thing. But I am so happy that you were protected in that situation, and I'm so thankful that you shared it. It's these kind of stories that give me courage and hope, so that if I ever get in a situation where it might seem like certain death, if I could stand firm and resolve in faith and belief in God, then I should know that everything's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, mashallah. No, it was a
Sure.
miracle. I like later on, I had to go through, like, I think there was post-traumatic stress syndrome for a while, but I was in awe and shock. There was a bruise on my head. Like, he did hit me once, and the second time, if he had hit me with that force, he could have killed me, right on my head. But then instead, he held his hand there and then chose to throw my phone down to break it. If I have any recording, he's gonna
Mm-hmm.
break it. Even my phone didn't break, mashallah.
Also, Did it have a case on it or no?
It did. It did. It
Okay.
was a brand new leather case, you know.
Okay.
Not the whole
How
thing.
it
Not the.
survived.
Salman,
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah, she came out of
Alhamdulillah.
it very well.
Yeah,
Alhamdulillah.
mashallah. Yeah, then I drove in that
Awesome.
condition all the way to Vermont.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I had to, I went straight, picked up Shazi, and then all the way I just kept telling this story over and over. Couldn't believe what happened.
Yeah.
Unreal.
Yeah,
Anyway.
it is so amazing how God fulfills His promise. You have to do your part, and God fills up like your bucket. You just put one drop, and God fills up your bucket. When you put your trust in God, and I know you'll have fear in the beginning, but you fight the fear, and you try to, you will have doubts in the beginning, but you steadfastly persevere that, God is, I'm going to put my trust in God, and I'm going to steadfast. And then afterward, magically, I mean, I can even talk about myself. I mean, I'm a very chicken type of person in the past. I mean, then can't even talk to somebody and have this kind of communication, and God takes the fear out of you. I mean, I can't even get on the stage and talk. And in the last conference, it was like a nightmare for me to even think about it. And so it's amazing how God takes the fear out of you, and then you become like a fearless person, Mashallah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
true. I was like that too. I was very before submission, very um fragile kind of a person, but subhanallah. The first thing you become is you really fearless. Yeah. Or we can work on our fears. It's not like we develop God will put you through a test according to the what by the virtue of your faith, right? It's God. Rashad has written the subtitle: God's tests are never unreasonable, right? It would be the test would not come to grade 3 student for grade 8 level of, you know. So the test would be exactly for the grade 3 soul, um, not the test of a master's student, right? So it would be something God knows that you can handle it.
Yeah, I mean, if fear is part of your weakness, you may get
Mm.
tested on fear. Some people are blessed with money, like we were reading Jonah. That was his test, that he was a messenger and he has supposed to hold his position, but he ran away in a ship. So, and if anybody is blessed with money, like a submitter, this person should know that the money is a test for that. I mean, it's pretty obvious. If somebody doesn't even have children, then tests will not be for that person. But if somebody is blessed with children and money, that could be the test for this person. But if the person holds the money and not spend it, that's mean it appears. I mean, I'm not saying that this is the job for that person, but it's very much that this person is becoming stingy with his money and not spending in the cause of God. It could be possible failure on his part, maybe, thank you.
Yeah, because certain tests, God says about those tests, surely you will be, surely. So the test of those who have children will be tested. Tests will come through children, like do we make them our God, or the money our God, you know, or the fear. Um, Obviously, um, the test would be still reasonable. Um, yeah. But you, Robert, you've been in a war, right? You're an ex-army personnel, right?
Yeah, I've seen the violence that men can perpetrate on men, but
Mm.
I like. Well, people say, "Thank you for your service. You bravely served." I say, "Well, no, not exactly. I scaredly served. I was like a bunny rabbit. I was scared to death the whole time I was through it." Um, everything was, I was scared perpetually when I was in the military. Luckily, I'm not in the military anymore. Hopefully, I've learned a little bit from that, but I still feel like I'm a coward in certain situations. Um, and but if I ever get into a situation where it's clear cut and dry, I would like to think that I could face that situation boldly and trust in God. And that might maybe be eventually my test. I don't know. I know I don't want to pray for a test. I don't want to do anything like that. But just hope that in that situation, like the brother was saying, that hopefully God will not test me to the point where I fail the test. But but I do appreciate all your guys' comments. I've given me a lot to think about. Thank you.
For me, I just want to add one more thing to that experience. Like, I have had a lot of trainings or de-escalating a hostile, client, because I have worked in women's shelters and all those homeless people and everything. So if somebody becomes aggressive, but of course it was God's mercy. All those trainings came handy, and I said, and I was able to even utilize those words, and like how to de-escalate is like look them in the eye and tone down and talk to them. If I had started to like, oh, please, uh, forgive me, or I'm so sorry. It's just like those words. I really feel like I was in different state of mind. Suddenly, something took over my head, and those words were coming out so calm that literally it took his air out. I would have I in normal time I would not have imagined that if such a situation ever came, I would be able to even take those steps which I was trained for. But it was subhanallah. I could feel the intervention, the divine intervention there. I could feel it. Praise God.
Yeah, Masha Allah. Messenger of Covenant says that 23 places in the Quran, God says this, that the believers and righteous, and they will be happy in this world here and after. But I think I noticed it's even in different words. God even saying a lot more times. Like, for example, here we read with Jonah that people, and God says, if it was for me. Okay, hold on 1 second. I'm sorry. Okay, 148. They did believe, and we let them enjoy this life. And then another verse, God said, absolutely, who devoted to God alone are saved. So these are the positive sentences, verses, and then there are negative verses that regards they disbelieve, and consequently this happened to them. So if you take like these negative verses and positive verses, it's a lot more than 23 times where God is verifying with examples. Here, 23 places God says the believer and righteous will be happy, and with example words like they did that and look what I did to them, and they didn't do that and look what happened to them. And these are like examples in practice, and those are like in the theory part. So God actually shows you the theory and proves it to you. Look what happened. You walk in the ruins and you see day and night. Yeah, like, have you ever passed by a graveyard at daytime and then try to go to the graveyard at nighttime? You will be fearful. I mean, I used to drive through the middle of the night through a graveyard. I mean, just driving in the car will give you like chills. So God shows you theory part, and God actually shows you how practically it is done. MashaAllah. Thank you.
Masha Allah. I wanted to read a few verses. This is Surah 10, Jonah, actually. Verse 62, 63, and 64. Happiness now and forever. Absolutely, God's allies have nothing to fear, nor will they grieve. There are those who believe and lead a righteous life. For them, joy and happiness in this world as well as in the hereafter, such as God's unchangeable law, such as the greatest triumph. Do not be saddened by their utterances. All power belongs to God. God is Hearer, the Omniscient. Absolutely to God belongs everyone in the heavens and the earth. And it goes on. So, it shows us that, the believers are going to be perfectly happy. They shouldn't have any fear and they should have any grief of any kind. They're going to have a perfect life now and forever. So they shouldn't have to worry about anything. I mean, if there's people that are constantly in a state of worrying or in a state of grief, I mean, those people are not going to be happy, because they're surrounded by all these fears and sad thoughts. And so for us to be in that state where we're able to enjoy, perfect happiness and experience heaven on earth, so to speak, I mean, we have to be in that state naturally where, we're fearless. It's a very negative feeling to surround ourselves with. It affects our happiness psychologically, physically, in every way. So God takes care of the believers, and if you really put your trust in God, then these things will not bother you. Yeah.
Masha Allah. By the way, we had a little snow today in Toronto. I can't believe it.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it has been like very cold May.
Yeah. Yeah, we saw about it in the news. I mean, it's kind of weird. There's like extremely cold temperatures on your side, and then there's Phoenix and Arizona, and those areas are boiling up, like extremely hot, like going over 100 degrees. Yeah,
Oh, really?
yeah. But here we
Yeah,
have perfect weather, mashallah. Come to California.
you
We
know how the air
have.
condition is, the inside is the cooler and the outside is the heat part, and it's cooling over there and throwing all the heat to the Phoenix. Yeah, and our Dallas is also area is very cool, very not normal. Like if you're in the high 40s and 50s area, it's very cold for us too.
We wake up this morning with a very, very white New Brunswick, and it snowed and snowed and snowed, and thick snow, a lot of snow and thick snow.
Oh my God. No, we had just flurries and they're gone now. Yeah, but I was surprised to see that. Wow.
Yeah, you would think this is a December month or January.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We still have heaters on.
Yes, alhamdulillah for heaters.
Yeah, mashallah.
Yeah, yeah. We're gonna sign off now, God willing.
Kamala, I didn't even know you noticed you were there. You were so quiet.
Actually, Salon today. Actually, what happened? Mohammed was out with the phone. Then I was on YouTube,
Oh, I see.
and then he came back home with the phone, and he couldn't get onto Global, so we were still on YouTube. And then at one point, very last part of the study, we were able, or after the study, we were able to get onto Global.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, Mohammed, when he came home, Global went off. Somehow we were having issues today. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, God willing, today's our last day here, so we're doing our final touches. So
Okay.
yeah, we didn't participate today. Yeah.
Mashallah. Good
God
luck to
willing, hope it
you.
all goes
May God be
smoothly.
with you throughout this transition and settling process and make everything easy, inshallah.
Thank you, inshallah. 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 Allah Hafiz, see you guys, and
Okay,
Assalamu
Assalamu
alaikum.
Alaikum
God
from
bless
me
you.
too.
Assalamu
Assalamu
Um,
Alaikum.
wa alaikum salam.
alaikum. So I guess we can stop the YouTube broadcast. So for those who joined us on YouTube, thank you for joining us. God willing, our next study is going to be on Tuesday and at 2 p.m. Pacific time. And our teacher is
I guess
going
it's
to
me,
be okay, God willing.
inshallah.
God bless you guys. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu Alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.